So I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and maybe shift gears a little bit, and we'll talk more about efficiency from an energetic standpoint in a cow herd. I need to acknowledge my co-authors, graduate students, one postdoc there. Mostly their contribution has been to, on the drive up here from yesterday, they fixed all of the screw-ups in my slides, so they're much more presentable here today. Well, okay, so this has been talked about quite a bit today, so I won't dwell on it, but if cow efficiency and managing for cow efficiency is very complex. And I've heard, I think Dr. Bob Weber referred to it several times as deep water, and that's true. You can see a lot of the topics that have been touched on here today, and the truth is that many of those important aspects of cow efficiency interact. And so it can be very complicated. But I'm going to focus on the metabolic efficiency piece here for most of this presentation, but just understanding that there's a pretty strong interaction with many of those other aspects. So let's just take a quick broad view, and this has also been mentioned several times today, but certainly reproductive efficiency remains the greatest economic output trait, whereas grazing and supplemental feed remain the overriding input costs. It's interesting to me that, I think maybe we don't give enough credit to the cow herd in terms of their contribution to overall beef production efficiency, because the cow-calf phase accounts for 74% of the total feed required to produce a pound of carcass weight. And that's according to a life cycle analysis that was published in 2019. So let's dive off into energetics here just for a minute and just talk about what we did here was modeled a 1,200 pound beef cow producing about 25 pounds of milk at peak lactation. And this first two columns here represents 160 days worth, I think, or 100. No, that's the full gestation. That is 160 days worth, where you can see there's 75% of the total energy used for maintenance and 25% for pregnancy. And like Dr. Funson mentioned this morning, of course, that percentage is going to go up if you, hang on a second, let me get this next one up here. Sorry, this is the one I was thinking of. But during lactation, we're talking about 2,200 versus 1,300 for maintenance, because you need to recognize that maintenance energy requirement increases during lactation, along with the energy required to produce milk, which you see there in 1,134 average megacalories for that milk production. But as you can see there, the total energy requirement during lactation just about doubles. And the other interesting thing is, if you calculate the average throughout the year, then 70% of that total energy requirement is relegated to maintenance. And most of us in academia and nutrition courses have heard for many years, if you take the previous slide, 74% of energy required to produce a carcass of beef comes from beef cows, and 70% of that energy is allocated to maintenance. That means that nearly half of the energy required to produce beef is used for maintenance in the cow herd. Okay, so then let's just take a look at what's going on. Dr. Funson showed some of these genetic trends this morning, but I just want you to see that, as I've said many times, the beef industry seems to be on a never-ending arms race for growth. And we continue down that path. This is the Hereford genetic trend, and you can see the pretty strong genetic correlation between mature cow weight and yearling weight EPD there. This is the Angus breed, and really the same story. It's interesting that those lines are coming together and crossing in the Hereford breed. That's probably a good thing, but a very strong genetic correlation that you can see there. And you know, we're asking the question, well, when are we going to get there, and where is there? Where are we headed, and how much growth do we need in the industry? Maybe understand today that cattle are bringing $2.40 and the cost of gain is $1.10. So that's definitely not going to slow this down, right? And so we may be getting to the point, or here eventually getting to the point where we do have to revisit some of the things that I think Matt will talk about tomorrow morning relative to terminal and maternal mating systems, and you know, maybe rejuvenation of planned crossbreeding systems and so on to deal with that. So, you know, here's the challenge for the cow, though, and that is the genetic correlations between these production EPDs or production traits or characteristics and feed intake are strong to at least moderate in most cases. And so you would anticipate that feed intake in the cow herd is also increasing as we continue down this path of aggressive selection for growth. And so Tommy Winder and Pete Anderson, Dr. Pete Anderson, put together a really nice presentation just a couple of months ago now, 3 months ago, at the Midwest American Society of Animal Science meetings, and really good presentation. But what they did is they showed, at least on a concentrate diet in feedlot cattle, intake is increasing as time goes by. There you see the black line is steers, the red line is the heifers in that very large data set from Elanco Knowledge Solutions. And so without question, feed intake in the industry is increasing. The question is it increasing scale to body weight? And so are the maintenance energy requirements in those cattle increasing, requiring more energy per unit of body weight, or more feed intake per unit of body weight? Well, surprisingly, in their large data set, when you scale feed intake on the feed yard cattle to a body weight basis, it does not appear to be increasing. It's relatively stable over time. And so, you know, maybe that's a good thing, but we all know that bigger cows are more likely to eat more feed due to that strong genetic correlation, and that's probably still the case. In fact, this is just a paper that we published last year that indicated, or we looked at the different factors in feed intake. It kind of did a pretty extensive review and calculated new equations. What we discovered in this effort was that in the older equations published by the National Academy of Sciences in the Beef Cattle Nutrition book, they anticipate that with an average forage quality, feed intake in a beef cow is somewhere around 1.7% or 1.7 pounds for every 100 pounds of body weight, if you want to think of it that way. In this newer equation that we published last year, it looks like it's more like 2 pounds, or 2 pounds per 100 pounds of body weight. So, you know, we probably need more data to tell if that's a real increase over time. The data from the previous equation used in the National Academy publication, those data were all published in the 70s and 80s. The data that we used in this publication were all published since the year 2000. So they are more recent, but they're not just in the last 10 years or so. And so we would like to update this here in the next year or two if we can. If we can find enough data to do that. Okay, so what's the take-home message then for a ranch given land base and these genetic trends? And so We looked at the genetic trends. These are federally inspected data from USDA, and you can see that carcass weights in both steers and heifers in the blue and red lines there have been increasing for a long time. And so certainly that genetic selection pressure is working. And then obviously today we've got, we have that situation with $1.10 maybe cost of gain and $2.40 value of the cattle on a live basis. So they're getting fed longer, 40 to 50 days. So that's obviously has a pretty big impact on that increasing carcass weight as well. But when we took the, I don't know if that's gold or orange line at the bottom there, and we converted those cow carcass weights to a live basis using an average yield for a cull cow. When we did that, it suggested that cow weights in the industry are increasing at the rate of about little over 7 pounds per year. So if we don't do anything different, if this trend continues, our beef cows will weigh about 70 more pounds 10 years from today than they do now. Okay, so then if we took Megan Gross's equation that I just shared with you there a minute ago or mentioned, and we applied it to a 10,000 acre ranch in north central Oklahoma. I think the stocking rate might be fairly similar to this part of Nebraska. I don't know that for sure, but native rangeland. And then when we use that equation, if you have a 1,000-pound cow on that particular ranch, you should run about 1,115 cows to accomplish about a 30% harvest efficiency, which is maybe a little bit beyond what our range ecologists like for us to actually utilize in that resource. But that's what we use with 30% harvest efficiency and 3,500 pounds of foraged dry matter produced per acre per year. Okay, and then if you had 1,500-pound cows, to put the same grazing pressure on that land base, you'd need to be running 805 females. Okay, does that make sense? And so that's really where the rubber meets the road if we continue the aggressive selection for growth and apply it to females that we retain for replacements. Another way to look at this, I like to look at it like this. If you'd had a 30-year career and you had the advantage or good fortune to make decisions for a cow-calf operation over those 30 years, and you purchased the genetics, and all you did was use industry average growth sires when you purchased bulls, what it really boils down to is that today on this same ranch, you should be running 130 fewer cows than you were running when you started your career. Does that make sense? I hope everybody follows that. So that is the impact, the relative impact of that genetic trend and aggressive selection for growth on the cow herd. Okay, so now let's talk just a little bit about the output or calf weaning weight. And I know many of you will have seen some of this, but we are finding multiple indications that there is environmental limitations to production on a forage-based system. The response is definitely variable. We've seen some parts of the country or some ranching operations where calf weaning weights continue to increase. You found a lot of data indicating that weaning weights have actually stabilized. And so I want to show you this graph. I've shared this with a lot of different groups over the last few years. And it's kind of shocking if you had not thought about this in these two large breed association data sets. So you can see there what's going on today. These are phenotypic weaning weights. These are not EPDs. These are actual adjusted weaning weights and national data from both Angus and Charolais. And it looks like they kind of stabilized there about in the mid to late 2006, 7, 8, in that range. And they're really not, obviously there's a lot of variability from year to year, but overall it's interesting that weaning weights have stabilized. We found the same when we analyzed the superior livestock video auction data several years ago. We need to revisit that effort. But in 2006, 2007, those superior reps in the north half and mountain west region of the country, they stopped assuming their clients' calves were going to weigh any more than they did last year. Okay, does everybody follow me there? So, and I should qualify that and say that is based on unweaned sale lots, meaning the calves are stripped off the cows, loaded on the truck, and those superior reps are working with the ranchers to try to figure out about what the optimum weight or what the weight was going to be when those cattle were ran across the scale on the pot. Okay, and so that's another big data set, but again, we need to renew that and see if that's still going on. I think we published that paper in 2016. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit. Well, let me just make this comment, and that is that, so what you have there, if you have a cow, larger mature weight, because we want and need larger carcass weight for our system, but she's not weighing any bigger calf. I mean, really what you have is a factory that's more expensive to operate, but producing no more widgets if you sell your calves at weaning. And so, it points to the obvious need for people to develop a strong relationship with someone that's going to help them capture the value of superior post-weaning growth genetics, right? If you just take them to the livestock market and they're not weighing anymore, but you continue to select for bulls that have, above breed average growth, you're probably not making any progress at all. In fact, maybe going backwards due to cow cost. Okay, so just talk about post-weaning efficiency for a minute. We have been basically selecting cattle for feed efficiency based on a relatively high quality diet, kind of a mixed forage concentrate diet, now for about 30 years or so. But that information is applicable to post-weaning phases of beef production, because if you're feeding maybe a 50% or 35% roughage diet and the rest is concentrate, I mean, that represents what we would have in Oklahoma from a forage quality standpoint, maybe about 30 days, Sandy. It's about the only period where we would have that good a quality forage. And so the other 10 or 11 months, that cow is going to be trying to, do her job on a lower quality diet. And of course, there you see the breed associations that have that genetic tool now, and we're fortunate to have it. And I think it's working reasonably well for a cow, and I'll show you why here in just a second. Again, the challenge is that, our cows in particular, that's not where they get to make their living on a high quality diet like that. So we have developed a system there at Oklahoma State where we can test cattle for forage efficiency. Okay, and so we do a very similar type performance test, but we use straight grass hay. Okay, and they essentially get no concentrate supplement. All they get is a mineral supplement. And so these tests last we have 21 days of adaptation to let the cattle get used to the feeders and the hay system. And then we test them for 70 days and measure weight gain, milk production, forage intake, greenhouse gases, and so on. All right, so here, this is the bottom two there, Dr. Emma Briggs's data. She's here. Amanda Holder, 2 of those studies. She's at the College of the Ocean. then the other 3 studies were other groups that did a similar type experiments that I'm going to describe here. So what we started out with, so we said, do these feed intake EPDs work for a cow that has to make her living on a moderate to low quality forage diet? And so we did several, these 4 experiments you see there at the bottom anyway, at our shop. In some of these studies, they received a forage diet for 70 to 90 days. Then we gave them an adaptation period to a concentrate diet, and then we tested them again for another 70 to 90 days. Okay, and sometimes we did crossover experiments where half the cattle started on concentrate and finished on forage, the other half started on forage and finished on concentrate. It didn't matter how we designed the experiment, we got the same answer every time. And that is that the feed intake correlation on the same cattle in the 2 different environments was moderate to high. Okay, so they ranked similarly when they consumed a concentrate diet relative to how they ranked when they consumed a forage diet. All 7 experiments are moderate to high correlation. That's a good thing, because it says that, yeah, actually, if we want to make genetic progress or changes in the cow herd, we probably can use those genetic tools that I shared you with those breed associations just a minute ago. Okay, so the surprise was that if we looked at how they performed or ranked for average daily gain in the 2 different environments, there was no relationship. And in fact, in 2 of these studies, it was negative relationship. So how long have we been selecting for growth in the industry now? Well, Sandy, since we came out of the first era of insanity, right, which was the 1940s and 50s, when we had cattle belt buckle tall. And since then, we have been selecting for growth. So it's kind of a shock that, and let me just move on to my next little summary slide here, because the bottom bullet point there says, kind of sums it up. It says the mixed diet weight gain is unrelated to forage diet weight gain. In other words, those genetic tools more than likely don't tell you very much, if anything, about how you might expect those cows or heifers to perform on moderate to low quality forage diet. Now, the first bullet point says that we do need a much larger experiment to determine if there is a genetic correlation, and if so, how strong that correlation is. These are all phenotypic correlations I've shared with you, but that's all the data we have at this point. And again, the interesting thing is that they all are very consistent. All of those experiments are very consistent results. Okay, so right now what we're doing in our shop is we're testing heifers, and then we move those out of our facility, get it cleaned up, and we start over with lactating fall calving cows. We test them for about 90 days, and then we pull the calves off them early. We let them dry up, bring them back in, and test them again for another 90 days, so that in a few years, we'll have 3 phenotypes on every one of of our cows in our cow herd. And the first question we asked when we moved to the strict forage diet was will it be repeatable across stages of production? In other words, growing heifer, lactating cow, gestating cow. Will they rank the same, or will, hopefully, will there be minimal re-ranking? Well, Dr. Harvey Freetley published a real nice study in 2020 kind of looking at this question. They used 5-year-old cows that were not pregnant, not lactating, but what they found is that the genetic correlation for dry matter intake between heifer development stage and 5-year-old cow stage was very strong, as you can see there, 0.84 and 0.73. Now in their study, they used a high quality diet. Corn silage, some dried distillers grains, and some alfalfa hay, which our cows in Oklahoma rarely get to see a nice quality diet like that. But this is encouraging that those appear to be relatively repeatable. And so then we launched off into the series of studies we're working on now, and that is the three studies a year I just described using this facility. We would rather be doing this work in the pasture, right? I mean, that will be the holy grail. And we think eventually we'll be able to get there. But this is our way of at least taking a big step forward in testing cattle for true forage efficiency, even though we have to do it in the pen, because we still don't know how to measure intake out in the pasture. Yes, you can measure it, but you have to radically modify their behavior to do that. So I'm not terribly confident that data is all that good either. But we can use external markers to do that. It's one approach, but certainly not perfect. But we're just now moving on to sensor applications and try to see if we can get closer to finding these efficient cows out there on pasture. Okay, so I'm going to share a little bit of data with you here. This is Sam Talley's recent thesis data, so it is preliminary. But I'm sorry I didn't take the time to convert those to English units, but this is just Sam classified these cows several different ways. I'm just going to show you the RFI data right quick, and then we'll move on. But here you see efficient, moderate, and inefficient classifications in this set of cows, lactating cows, and you can see that there's a pretty big difference, 13.9 to 16.8 kilograms of hay intake a day. That winds up being about a 19% difference between those two classifications. So let's just look at the performance data here right quick, and I just want to show you that it lines up like you would expect in a residual feed intake experiment. So body weight is not different among those three efficiency classifications. Average daily gain is not different, and milk yield is not different. Now this is late lactation milk yield, so it's lower than the 25 pounds that I mentioned earlier. Body condition score, adjusted calf weaning weight, not different among these efficiency classifications. Now I'm not a big RFI fan. Our group talks about this, kicks it around all the time, but this is encouraging that we can find females that are very productive and don't have to eat a lot. Okay, I'm not suggesting that we select for females that eat little. I think what we're seeing is that we need to find females that are moderate in forage intake, because we find a lot of females through this series of experiments that we find females that are small and eat a lot. We find cows that are big and don't eat all that much. And we find some cows that eat a bunch and are not very productive, and cows that don't eat all that much and are extremely productive. So that's cool, and that's where we need to head, and that's exciting. Here's his gestation performance data, efficient, moderate, inefficient. At the end of the day, there's a huge difference in his gestation data between the efficient and inefficient classified cows, and same way, no difference in their performance during that strict forage test. Okay, body condition score is the same as well. Okay, we talked about maintenance energy requirements. So this is a really cool thing in Sam's data, is that there is a huge difference in maintenance energy requirements based on their classification here. Remember, this is 50% of the energy that it takes to make 1 pound of beef on the hook. And so that's really interesting, and we'll continue to pursue and look at that because, that's just going to be really important in terms of being able to find females that don't cost all that much and are, again, very productive. We're not the first ones to suggest that, but it looks like there's some truth to that statement that those efficient females definitely do seem to have lower maintenance energy requirements. Okay, this is some of Dr. Briggs' data. I just want to share a couple of these contemporary groups with you that we have tested. This is Emma Briggs' data from 2023. Notice that as you'd expect, the more hay they consumed on the x-axis at the bottom, that's hay intake in pounds, the more they gained, right? And you would hope. But there's a lot of variation there, right? It's not a real strong correlation. And what I want to point out, now the average intake in this contemporary group is about 16 pounds. Here's what I want to point out. Notice there's 2 heifers consuming exactly the same amount of hay, again, over a 70-day period. So we've dialed in pretty close to what these animals will eat. One of them is gaining 1.4 pounds a day, and one of them is losing weight, for crying out loud. So that female is telling us that she was healthy, right? We were concerned about she was healthy throughout the experiment. She's telling us that she cannot handle this environment. Now, if you were to supplement or eat enough, you could probably cover her up, and she would probably perform reasonably well. You know, if you artificially modified the environment, well, I won't get too far off into that. But if you increase the inputs to make sure that this set of heifers had very low reproductive failure. Okay, so this is Bailey Thompson's data set from just this last summer. And what Bailey drew a rectangle she thought we ought to keep as replacements. And I said, well, Bailey, why didn't you keep those 3 over there on the right? So this is set up the same way. Hay intake on the bottom, average daily gain over there on the y-axis. She said, well, you told me not to increase the cow herd's intake over time. So, I think it's interesting thought. Those 3 females to the right of that green eagle performed extremely well on hay, but they eat a lot. And so, if we're going to use like the idea of using residual average daily gain on a forage-fed animal, we probably need to implement a threshold for how much intake, how much cow cost we're willing to put up with. You would anticipate that those would be the 3 that might suffer the most in a drought. And then in every group that we test, we find this situation. Okay, it's similar to the last contemporary group I shared with you. That red rectangle, to me, those females are telling us that they have no business becoming a cow. Does that make sense? Now remember back to the crossover studies and the forage versus concentrate. My crickets are going off. So, meaning I'm about 15 minutes time here, or getting close. So remember that the intake we hope is reasonably high in terms of repeatability. The average daily gain is not. And so those females you would anticipate, and we will down the road, they become cows and more, subjected to reproductive failure. I'm not going to spend much time on this. Really cool, something that Amanda Holder discovered here a few years ago. All the GLP-1 products that are for sale for humans. She did an RNA sequencing piece to this project, and she discovered that the cows that eat a lot, okay, those over there on the right, they just keep on eating. She discovered that there's a K voltage gated channel modifier subfamily, and don't ask me what all that means, but it is involved in regulating glucagon-like peptide 1, okay, which you see advertisements for nearly every day now on televisions, and apparently our insurance is no longer going to pay for it. But that's pretty cool. So those cows continue to eat because they're not getting the satiety signal. Does that make sense? There's nothing in their feedback mechanism telling them stop eating. Okay, and so maybe eventually we'll figure out a way to identify those cows early on. Okay, so just a few comments then about what you can do now. Since it looks like those feed intake genetic tools are going to be useful, I think maybe it's a good idea perhaps to combine the mature weight with those feed intake EPDs, and several of the breed associations also have that mature weight EPD available. And so remember, it's the average daily gain that's the problem, but we think the intake EPDs is going to work reasonably well. But we have mature weight EPDs, and so as I shared with you early on in this presentation, they're useful in helping to control feed intake. So I want you to look at this. This is a set of proven Angus bulls I downloaded. See my circle there, the upper left quadrant there, meaning those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sires produce daughters, proven bulls. Their milk EPD was above 0.6. Those sires produce daughters that are smaller than breed average, but eat more. Now, who wants to sign up for that? Probably not. Now, maybe long term, we'll find out that cows have got to eat a lot to maintain their body condition. But so far, our data says it doesn't have to be that way. But this is also going to get you lower post-winning performance as well because of that strong genetic correlation. So looks to me like this is a bad idea, and always selecting for smaller cattle is not really going to take us very far. Here's another thought, and that is the relationship of mature weight to marbling. Now, I think maybe here in just a minute we'll get into more discussion about the post-winning phase, but there is no relationship between post-winning performance and marbling. And of course, all the money and the premiums right now are in marbling. Someday corn is going to be $8 a bushel again. And then, this business about $1.10 average or feedlot cost of gain and $2.40 fed cattle is going to go away. I don't know how much longer it lasts. Hopefully it lasts a lot longer. But when that changes, maybe something like this will be an idea, along with, I'm sure, the things that Matt Spangler is going to share with us tomorrow morning. Okay, so from a system view, one thing we discovered, this is just using the Angus dollar indexes, each 10 pounds increase in yearling weight increases feedlot profit by about $6. All right, now remember the dollar F or dollar feed in the Angus dollar values ignores marbling. Okay, so if we just think about post-weaning average daily gain, carcass weight, each 10 pounds of yearling weight EPD gets us about $6. Each 10 pounds of increase in yearling weight EPD gets us about a 12-pound increase in mature cow weight. Okay? Each 10-pound increase in yearly weight increases cow cost by just under $6. Now, that's not my data. We're studying this now, and we'll have more data on it later. But right now, it looks like it's a wash. If you ignore marbling, it's a wash if you consider the entire system. Just a few words about milk, and then we'll move on. We discovered a couple things here in the last few years. really interesting to a nerdy guy like me. But so let's see here. So I forgot what my slide says. Increasing milk energy yield was associated with decreasing maintenance energy requirements. So this is what we discovered, all right? Now, the reason this is a shocker is because that National Academy of Sciences publication has said for about 45 years that if you increase growth and if you increase milk production, you increase mature weight, you increase maintenance energy requirement. Well, we did a very extensive experiment here. I'm not going to go into the details about how we did this, but we found just exactly the opposite. Okay? I thought we'd never get this paper published, but my golly, we did. So it's interesting. So in this case, what appears to be happening is that the cattle with lower maintenance have more energy left over to do the productive things, like milk production, raise a bigger calf, and put on more body condition. Okay? The NASEM book had been saying for many years, the more of those productive things you have, you're going to be increasing maintenance. And so hopefully this will hold over time, because that's really, really a good thing. Now, to complicate things, the other thing we found out is that feed intake is far more sensitive to milk production than we knew. Okay, that same publication, there it is, the Nutrient Requirements of Beef Cattle, National Academy of Sciences publication, 2016, and in the 1996 version, and in the 1984 version, and in the version before that, they had been using in all of the cow feed intake equations applied from this book. It's used throughout the industry many different ways, indicated that 1 pound increase in milk production increases cow feed intake by 0.2 pounds. Okay? So, yep, as milk production goes up, intake does too. Well, what we have discovered, this is Sam's data from the last 2 years. Notice the milk line in those equations is plus milk yield times 0.4 in year 1, milk yield times 0.4 in year 2. In fact, here's all of the data from our lab over the last several years, and they are all 0.35 up to 0.71. And so we're saying at this point that response in a beef cow is at least double of what that old equation indicates it is. Okay, and so that probably will influence some of your multi-trait selection indexes, because it's going to make the cow with more milk production more expensive. Okay? Here is the equation in blue that Megan Gross published last year. This is how that looks over a range of forage intake or energy in the diet. If I can point at this. Actually. So most of these cows are going to be running in a range. Sandy, can you even see that barely? Are going to be running kind of in this range here, right? Summertime, for a few days, you're going to have diet quality here. For a lot of the winter, you're going to have diet quality in this range. On average, we think probably the average diet quality in a cow's life is somewhere around 58 to 60% TDN. The old equation in green, again, in use throughout the industry in many different ways, and nutrition publications, nutrition software, was underestimating intake in a lactating cow by 6 pounds a day. So it was underestimating it a lot. So that's what I mean. It's more sensitive than we thought we could do. Okay, so what can you do now? I guess we've already talked about that. And that is combine the use, double down, if you want to think of it that way, to control cow costs. If that is your primary breeding objective, on feed intake, EPD, and the mature cow weight. I don't know I don't know that's the sweet spot on that graph, but it's mature weight, breed average or below, intake around breed average, perhaps below. You draw your rectangle where you think it fits your breeding objectives, but I'm just suggesting that that would be very, very useful and powerful if you use both of those at the same time to control cow costs over time. Okay, so how then, let's just wrap it up, how to make progress with the tools that are available now. So if, and that's a big if, your primary breeding objective is to control cow costs in a cow-calf forage-based enterprise, I think since the average daily gain genetic tools we have are not working for a cow consuming a moderate to low quality forage diet, it's still pretty easy to get there. And if you've got a set of scales and you could turn your heifers out for 70 to 100 days at some period that's convenient for you to measure their weight gain and then rank those animals for weight gain and figure out which ones are showing you that they cannot handle that forage environment and have no business to become cows. That's really all you need to do. I mean, obviously, it'd be nice to have an EPD for forage gain and so on and so forth. But until we get there, now some of you, bullet item number 2 there, are probably already doing this and maybe haven't thought about it in quite this way. But if you're challenging your cattle to perform on available forage and then also at the same time selecting based on fertility, you may already have made a lot of progress on forage efficiency, whether you were intentional about that or not. But I encourage you, if cows are your business and forage, is your product from sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide, I encourage you to consider getting more intentional about selecting cattle that are more forage efficient. So use sires with moderate mature cow weight EPD, dry matter EPD, and milk EPD. Milk primarily because of the pretty dramatic influence it has on your cow cost from an intake standpoint. And then we need more of these phenotypes submitted to the breed association so they strengthen those so that those genetic tools become more powerful and more accurate. It will help us control cow costs as time goes by. And so if you go purchase sires, you might really think about prioritizing operations that are already and maybe have generations of cattle that have been selected for moderate forage intake, or at least intake so that their EPDs from that operation are more accurate. Okay, I'd be glad to take any questions if we have time. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here, and I thank you for hanging with us throughout the day and sticking in here and listening to my presentation. Thank you.